Welcome back to another episode of Journey Through Cinema, where we take a look back at the history of film by year, best films, awards, and notable cinematic achievements. The year is 1918. The First World War is coming to a close, but the Spanish flu is on the rise. In many ways, 1918 was reflective of where we were in 2020, fighting a global pandemic with new competitive forms of media that were kind of being developed. But whereas in the modern day, we were dealing with, like the streaming wars, back in 1918, the studio wars were starting up, as producers fought to lock in big-name talent under ambitious and lucrative exclusive contracts. Director and actor Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle would be given the first multi-million multi-film deal to produce 6 pictures with Paramount. Meanwhile, Charlie Chaplin would become the first actor to sign a $1 million contract for 8 films with First National Picture. Louis B. Mayer would arrive in Hollywood to found the Mayer's Picture Company, which would become one of the big M's in MGM. Meanwhile, Warner Brothers would release their first picture with My 4 Years in Germany, a piece of American wartime propaganda depicting the start of the war from the German perspective. Now, the Germans in this film were kind of depicted as these one-dimensional characters, kind of mustache-twirling villains. Its historical accuracy could be, highly questionable, but as a piece of pivotal studio history, it is an interesting look at one of the launch pads of one of the biggest studios in Hollywood. This year, Oscar Micheaux would found his production company, Micheaux Film and Book Corporation, and begin production on his first films. Micheaux wouldn't create the first black-owned studio. That would be actually the Lincoln Motion Picture Company, which we covered in one of the previous videos. However, Micheaux would become the first prominent African-American filmmaker in America, with most of his efforts focused on what were called race films, which back then was just a term for directing a movie towards a predominantly black audience. He is a prolific figure though, and he made a big mark, and he probably does deserve to have his own video made about him someday in the future here. But back to that pesky, influenza pandemic, most of cinema kind of ignored it. You didn't really see it mentioned or alluded to in movies or shorts, but for the most part, cinema remained this escape from the troubles of the ongoing First World War and the new outbreak of disease. Luckily, the former would be coming to an end as, the later was just getting started. The lack of, seeing the Spanish flu in narrative films, this may have not been an accident. It may have actually been a calculated choice to try and reduce public panic from spreading. One of the few surviving remaining documentations of the pandemic was Dr. Wise on influenza. This was mostly a narrative film designed almost like this after-school PSA. Screening it, I imagine, was a little difficult, given that, while it's preaching social distancing, it's kind of requiring people to sit in a crowded theater just to view it. So I guess a little counterproductive. For the most part, though, this year in cinema was about escapism. Tarzan made his cinematic debut on January 27th in Tarzan of the Apes, based on the novel by Edgar Rice Burroughs, starring Elmo Lincoln in the title role. He would go on to do a full trilogy completed in 1921. Now, like and subscribe to catch my upcoming video on that Tarzan trilogy, but I won't be doing it until about 1921, so you may be waiting just a smidge. On May 13th, Roscoe Arbuckle would debut Moonshine as one of the earliest, if not the first film to feature a direct breaking of the fourth wall in a scene where the female lead confesses her love to Fatty with no real romantic build-up. When the father remarks how crazy this all is, Fatty responds by telling him, "Look, this is only a 2-reeler. We don't have time to develop love scenes." Fatty, I guess the 1918 version of Deadpool, if you will.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
On November 22nd, the German film The Yellow Ticket would premiere. It is a miracle that this film still exists, as the Nazi Party would try to hunt down every copy of it and destroy it. It tells the story of a young Jewish girl who immigrates to Russia under a yellow ticket, provided only to sex workers. There she works as a call girl during the night, while stealing the identity of her tutor's dead sister to study at the university during the day. For the 1918s, this was covering some pretty heavy material like prostitution, knocking yourself out, I guess. I'm going to say it that way. I love how everyone has to try and talk around it on YouTube. Good job. That's a really effective strategy, you guys. But anyways, as much as 1918 cinema was censoring all this and modern day YouTube is now censoring it, what really got 1940 Germany's goat was the fact it had a Jewish protagonist. Now that was just too far. The fact it still survives, this is a proof positive of the enduring power of art. On December 15th, meanwhile, Cecil B. DeMille would make his first remake of one of his biggest films, completely refilming his movie from 1914, The Squaw Man, which was one of the first films out of Hollywood. And again, you can find it as one of my first videos on this channel. This remake is unfortunately now lost to time, but the more pivotal original can still be found in full. The highest grossing movie of the year was Mabel Normand's Mickey. Though the exact box office gross really isn't known, the movie sold more than 40 million tickets by the end of its run, making it the most attended movie of the silent era in total seats sold. Besides that film, Cecil B. DeMille basically dominated the box office with his infidelity drama Old Wives for New, his crime drama The Whispering Chorus, and his Squaw Man remake. All of these are in contention for second place. And with that bit of history out of the way, let's move into my top picks of the year. We had an amazing set of films from this year. Notable achievements include The Sinking of the Lusitania. This was a short film directed by legendary animation pioneer Winsor McCay, which shows the German sinking of the American commercial liner, the Lusitania, which played a big part in America joining the war. The animation for this time was actually very stunning. It looks simple now, but it was McCay's first foray into this newly developed cell animation. Now, a lot of people know already what this is, but for those who don't, it allowed animators to create layers with static frames, being one layer and then a motion frame being set and stacked on top of it. This minimalized the need for artists to painstakingly redraw each and every background whenever they were having just one thing in the frame move. Because previously, they had to just draw it over and over and over again, hundreds of thousands of times. This was what McCay had to do for, say, Gertie the dinosaur. Even though the dinosaur is the main thing moving in the frame, somebody had to go in and draw each of those backgrounds every single time one thing moved. It was painstaking. Now, this was still the infancy of this technology, so it was still very, very hard to align all these layers and take the photographs of them. So McCay, it took him about 8 weeks just to do about 10 seconds.
Oh my God. That's the whole thing. That's 3 weeks of work. You're gonna be okay.
But at the end of 25,000 drawings, McCay managed to display a pretty loyal reenactment of an event that shocked the entire world. This was a big cinematic achievement that was inserted into newsreels as pretty much the only depiction of this event. Now next, I would also recommend Shoulder Arms, another Charlie Chaplin film that's also set in World War I. This movie was used to help promote war bonds. It has the usual Charlie Chaplin charm, with him playing this buffoon soldier, and even has, it was all just a dream trope that became kind of, a narrative taboo. Another big movie would be The Bellboy from Roscoe Arbuckle, one of the great directors and character actors of the silent era. In this film, Fatty is very much upstaged by the true star of the movie, Buster Keaton. This was not their first film together, but it was the first film to truly show off Keaton's, athleticism and knack for thrilling stunts. In the words of Robert Ebert, no one knew the limits of the frame better than Buster Keaton, and understood that the walls of the screen, these were a confined space that you could play off of, that they were restrictive, but also could be used in a creative fashion. This is the first time you see Keaton in full force, ricocheting around the room, jumping over walls, and moving kind of just like, a man possessed. And now with all that said, let's get into my top 3 of the year. Number 3 is going to go to Stella Marie. I have a full review on this movie on this channel, so I'm not going to take up a ton of time on this. If you want to see more about my thoughts on it, feel free to go over and watch that video. However, I will reiterate that this movie, it really proved how great of an actress Mary Pickford was, as she shook off her typecasting for a very, very pivotal role for her. She was a master of her art and a founder of the acting craft for screen. It was never more apparent than in this movie, where she takes on 2 dual roles, one being the standard issue Mary Pickford character as America's young sweetheart with, blonde curls and a sweet smile, but it was in her second character that she faced her first real challenge as an actress. The character of Unity is this emotionally and physically abused orphan who never really gets a leg up on life. It is a star-making performance had, Pickford not already been one of the top 2 or 3 stars in the entire world. But it does prove once and for all that she does deserve to be considered one of the greatest of this era, as she embraces this tragic character in a role where she really would be easily unrecognizable. So check that one out because I highly recommend it. And also check out that video because it goes much more in depth as to what's in the movie, but also, why Pickford was so great in it. And next on my film at number 2 is A Dog's Life, another short film from Charlie Chaplin. Here we have a story of the tramp and, well, I guess another tramp. A homeless man who befriends a down out of his luck dog, and it changes his fortunes for the better. This could be considered one of the earliest and maybe best of the boy and his dog genre. And this one, it really is for all the dog lovers out there, as the film tries to make use of, the cutest pup that they can possibly find. It really is easily Chaplin's probably most aw movies, I guess. And that's not to say you don't have the usual tramp buffoonery. You do, complete with scenes of, a pack of mutts chasing him through the streets, stealing chunks out of his underwear. Or scenes where Chaplin, is puppeteering an unconscious man. These kind of things, they're a highlight. And they are getting creative on how to utilize this dog in Charlie's brand of comedy. But the reason I think this stands out is just its feel-good nature. We are used to seeing the tramp as this public nuisance, but here we see him as, pardon the pun, an underdog. He's a man down and out of his luck who we are actively rooting for, which may not always be the case with the tramp. He can sometimes be kind of an asshole. But all of it culminates in just this warm, happy feeling. So, in a movie like this, what more could you want? You got the laughs, and you got some cute stuff, and you got a happy, fuzzy ending. It's just one of the more brighter and more accessible Charlie Chaplin films. And with that, we come to my number 1 pick of the year, a film from legendary director Victor Hoostrom, what I consider to be his silent era masterpiece. The Outlaw and His Wife is a melodramatic tragedy. It tells the story of Hulda, a widowed woman who ends up marrying an outlaw and fleeing with him into the wilderness. And I am going to get into some spoilers here, so viewers beware. As a piece of Swedish filmmaking, the nature is as much a character as either the outlaw or his wife. It is, in fact, probably one of the best depictions of, a friend turning into a complete villain. You see nature in the happy days. It feels forgiving, bright, and sunny. A representation of the 2 young lovers as they raise their family out in the wilderness. The movie is using this tinted film technique to show emotional changes in both the seasons and the emotional states of the characters. The more passive yellow when things are going good. Summertime, ease of living. Blue for the cold, helplessness, tragedy. And tragedy does indeed strike, as the law finds the young family hiding out, all led by the villainous bailiff who had proposed to Hulda and been rejected. Tough love. Though our outlaw is able to kill the bailiff, Hulda is still forced to make a terrible choice in this moment. As she's cornered, she has to choose to either cast her child off a cliff or allow her to be captured, and she doesn't know what's going to happen to her. The entire movie is indeed a moral tragedy. A lot of the weight here is being carried by the fantastic original play. It is making these moral questions regarding acts of sin out of desperation or love. The outlaw was originally arrested for stealing sheep to feed his family in the winter, but only after no one would give him a job or allow him to pay off his debts. However, rather than serving his sentence out, he fled the law. So, you have some villainous acts, you have some good acts, you have some spaces in between. Now, his wife lived a good life, had wealth from her dead husband, and a good name. She was well respected in her community, but she decided to give that all up just for possibly fleeting love, tying herself to a husband and his crimes in a complete rejection of society. And then, when she becomes cornered, she chooses to cast her own child from the top of a cliff rather than risk what these men may do to her. These were morally gray but interesting societal questions for the time. Is there forgiveness for crimes committed out of a sense of desperation? Throwing away what you have in life, good or bad, out of just passion? Or murder to spare someone you love from suffering? As said by the line in the film, God is sometimes far, but the judgment of men is always near. This may be the core theme of the movie itself. Here, nature is cruel, reinforced in the strong shots such as the waterfall, a great image of our main characters staring over it as an empty precipice. They are small in comparison. They don't really matter much in the grand scheme of things. Later in the film, there's even a scene where the outlaw falls and has to be saved while he's hanging from the side of the cliff, his friend trying to pull him up. And in this moment, his friend, who is in love with his wife, considers cutting the line so, he can, have his wife, I guess that's what he wants. But, again, like a good buddy, he decides not to kill his best friend and hauls him up. Yet that side of that cliff, it's an ever-present danger that eventually, it's, Chekhov's gun. It's coming back for you. When their child finally dies falling from it, the outlaw and his wife's relationship, it turns cold as ice. And so too, again, does nature, always reflecting people's emotional or mental states. The relationship spirals out of control as both the outlaw and the wife, they turn on each other. They're freezing and they're starving, and this small shed, it ultimately becomes almost a prison of its own making as they come to hate each other, and hating all the choices that led them here. Ultimately, the wife chooses to leave the shed and goes out into the snow to freeze to death. When her husband returns, he finds her body lying in the snow. One of the most evocative images of the silent era, as he chooses to lay down next to her and let the snow cover them both. It's a very, very almost Romeo and Juliet kind of scene. And yeah, oof, it goes pretty heavy. It's thick with the melodrama, but it works within this visual media because it really sells it. This is a master of a silent tragedy. Most of the story is very easily told through that physicality, with title cards really being used almost purely for dialogue, less telling what is happening and more showing. And what dialogue is in there, it's lifted almost directly from the actual play, with some of the best lines being used. Our two actors here, they're doing a great job of conveying their tenderness and falling out through just pure body language. Changes in posture and looks, it's still, highly theatric, as was common during this time, but it gets across those emotional highs convincingly. That scene of these two just falling apart from the death of their child and then embracing in the cold, it hits. But at the root of all of it is still the land, the calling to flee out into the great unknown, to try and tame and master it before it comes back to snatch you, your family, and everything else and leave you in the bitter cold. And out of my journey, this has some of the best imagery that has stuck with me more than any other film. And in the silent era, a time that fully embraces the visual language, that is some of the highest praise I think I can give. But I think that's all I have for this one. Please let me know if you've seen any of the films from 1918 and what you thought of them. Please subscribe for more film flashbacks and modern movie analysis. Until then, as always, keep those reels turning. Thank you.